And welcome and thank you for joining us online today. My name is Andrew Wills. I'm the Director of IPA Queensland. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the various lands that people are meeting on today for this meeting. For us, we are Peter and I are in the room here in Meanjin. So we of course honour the Turrbal and Yagara people and offer our honour and respect to First Nations people who are joining us online today. IPA's Mastercraft series was all about developing essential knowledge and contemporary skills in the craft of public administration. So we do this through a short and digestible dive into the topic of hand, looking at why it's important to the profession of public administration, particularly in Queensland. Today's topic of estimates, of course, certainly fits the bill for that. It's an important part of the budget process and important to public accountability in Queensland. And of course, it's very timely, given we're only a couple of weeks out from this year's estimates process. So IPA Queensland has invited Peter Bridgman to explore this topic today for you. Peter is a barrister handling matters relevant to government and governance, including public law, legislation and public policy, to name a few. He's a member of QCAT and the Mental Health Review Tribunal. In 2019, many of you would know he was commissioned by the government to review the state's public sector employment laws and framework, known as the Bridgman Review. And that has certainly led to subsequent reforms in the sector. He has first-hand experience in the estimates process, having held senior leadership roles in the Queensland public sector, including Deputy Director General and at CEO levels, and has regularly written on and presented on public law, public policy and governance. And Peter will present for about 30 minutes or so today on this topic. We're then glad to be joined also after that by our colleagues in the Department of Premier and Cabinet, Rebecca McGarity, who's the Acting Associate Director General in the Policy Division and the Cabinet Office, and Rob Lloyd-Jones, who's Director of the Cabinet Office, I should say. So thank you both. They'll be offering some comments, some additional comments on contemporary practical considerations and also online to take some questions after, which we will do through the Q&A function. So if you have questions, please pop those in the Q&A function at any point. And if you see a question in there that you like or that resonates with you, you can vote for it, or you should be able to like it or vote for it, and that will help us keep track of what questions are most of interest. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to pass over to Peter Bridgman.
Andrew, thank you very much for that. And it's a great privilege to be able to join you all here today to talk about parliamentary estimates, which is, of course, an annual event. So if you might just move on, I'm going to be asking Andrew to assist me with the slides here. So I'm going to talk about why estimates are important, a little bit about what they are, where they come from, and what your role is as public administrators in ensuring that the parliamentary estimates process is effectively managed and discharged. It's also great that we've got Rebecca and Rob here to complement anything that I've got to say with their much more current lived experience. I've got some theory and some practice to talk about, but you'll find that those two current leaders in the Department of Premier and Cabinet have got much more current experience to talk about. I just want to start by getting some facts in there about what are estimates. They're an annual series of parliamentary committee meetings that talk about the budget for each ministerial portfolio. I'm going to dive a bit deeper into that later on. They take place in what's called the Red Chamber, which was the former Legislative Council chamber. Students of parliamentary history will know that the Legislative Council was abolished in 1922, and the Red Chamber is used for the official opening of Parliament by the Governor and for the parliamentary estimates, as well as some other functions. Each minister and the departments are scrutinised by the committees for about half a day each. And I'll post a timetable later on. Much of the material will be provided to you by IPA, including details of the parliamentary program and the timetable. So before the budget is considered by the Parliament, the committees report. So this is part of the scrutiny process of the budget by the Parliament. I can't promise that you're going to come away from this discussion loving estimates. What I would like, though, is for you to understand the important part that you play as public administrators, assisting ministers to discharge their responsibilities, assisting directors general to inform and advise the Parliament of important questions around the budget, and make sure that that balance is right. And we start with some history. Why is history important? Well, it tells us where we've come from. It's sometimes easy to ignore history because we're deeply immersed in the present. We have to respond to the demands of today. But we respond to the demands of today informed by what's happened in the past. And if we're not informed by what's happened in the past, we are, as the saying goes, doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. So let's start with the person who was in charge of the budgets when estimates first came into existence. This rather unusual looking character with a pearl earring and wispy moustaches is King Charles. Next slide, please, Andrew. King Charles, not the third, our current king, but King Charles I. He ruled during a tumultuous period in English history, which eventually gave rise to the supremacy of the Parliament over the Crown. He ruled as an absolute monarch. He believed, as many of the monarchs did around that time, in the divine right of kings, occasionally queens. He warred constantly against the bishops. This was very, very sectarian times, the battle between Protestant and Catholic religions featuring heavily. There was an Irish rebellion, the so-called War of the Three Kingdoms. He was King of England, Scotland and Ireland. And it gave rise to the English Civil Wars. And Charles was tried and beheaded for treason. This came about particularly because in 1641, Andrew, if I could, during what's called the Long Parliament, the Commons asserted its authority over the king. Charles had had a rather disastrous and unsuccessful war in Scotland. He needed more money to raise an army. He just wanted to levy a tax. The Parliament said, no way, you've got to come through us. And part of the trade-off in him getting the taxes that he needed and wanted for his wars was that the Commons asserted its authority over what's called the ways and means. How is money raised? Ways and means is one of those duplicate bits of language we come across: give, devise and bequeath and so on. Very legal in its terms. How is money raised? In December of 1641, the MPs gave Charles a list of 204 problems that they wanted him to address. He ignored them. They nonetheless asserted themselves over him and passed laws that said the budget must come to the House. So next slide, please. The ways and means are how government raises money to meet its expenditures. We now call it revenue. The big expenses required new taxes. Parliament's refusal gave rise to Charles I dismissing the Parliament. He still couldn't get his money. He had to recall the Parliament, and that was the start, really, of the Long Parliament. The Long Parliament because they were not dissolved. And the forward revenues are estimates of the ways and means. They're not the actual things, they're an informed estimate. And in Queensland, we use this same language. So this is colonial Queensland, the first colonial budget on the 2nd of June, 1860. And it might be a little bit hard to see on that screen, but the report from the Courier, the Moreton Bay Courier, which is one of the predecessors of the Courier Mail, talks about the probable ways and means and probable expenditures, and they're reporting this. Hansard doesn't exist to inform our recollection of this. So this is part of our inheritance. If we fast forward to the 1980s, you can see that the Parliament actually referred to the estimates of the probable ways and means, with the focus being on expenditure. In our current parlance, if I can have the next slide, the current parlance, most of that information is contained in what we now call budget paper number 2. And I think later on, Rebecca might take us into a bit of a deeper dive about what makes up the budget in itself. But this next slide shows the list of budget papers that I've grabbed from the Treasury website. It's a lot of information. And if you've ever seen the budget papers piled up, they're an imposing pile of paper. Budget speech, budget paper number 2, I just mentioned, a capital statement, the measures of the budget themselves, the service delivery statements, one for each ministerial portfolio. And those service delivery statements often form the basis of the material considered by the estimates, by the committees at estimates. It's an overview, budget at a glance, and some specialised documents as well. The estimates committees that we now know started in that long parliament, where the House of Commons formed itself into what's known as a committee of the whole House. So all the members of the Commons sitting together scrutinised the budget in detail. Same process was adopted by the US in its very first Congress in 1789, and it's commonly used across representative democracies in wildly varying forms. But if you look at India, Canada, New Zealand, they have processes into estimates, the parliamentary scrutiny of the budget, demonstrating the Parliament's supremacy over the executive. In Queensland, we originally also had a committee of the whole House up until 1988. In the context of the Fitzgerald inquiry in the last couple of years of the Bjelke-Petersen and the Hearn governments, a parliamentary accounts committee was created as one of Fitzgerald's interim recommendations, along with a public works committee. And those committees took over the scrutiny of the revenue and expenditure and the commitment of capital works. After the government changed in 1989, the Goss government established estimates committees by sessional orders. They were called estimates committees A, B, C, D, and E. But they were only there for the purpose of the budget scrutiny, and that's all they did. From 2011, after a report from Parliament itself, 7 portfolio committees were created, and that's what we have today. The precise makeup of the portfolios, of course, depends on what the structure of government is from time to time. But they scrutinise the legislation, they scrutinise the programs, they ask questions of ongoing administrative relevance, and they scrutinise the budget. Typically, the chair of the portfolio committee chaired proceedings, but new from this year, we can have the next slide, the Speaker is going to chair each committee when considering estimates. So the Speaker is the Honourable Pat Weir MP, the member for Condamine. If he is a witness, as he is on the very first day when the Speaker's own estimates are considered, the Deputy Speaker, Mr Krause, these are both members of the LNP, and Standing Order 179 was amended recently to reflect this change. This was an election commitment. And if you have a look at last year's estimates, you'll see that almost every Estimates Committee report had a dissenting or qualified opinion from the LNP when they were in opposition, saying we need to improve the chairing of these processes to make it less dependent on the quirks of individual chairs and more regular. And the LNP's election commitments included reform of the estimates process, which has manifested itself in this change in the chairing arrangements. The intention is to bring consistency and a high level of practical management to the debate and the proceedings. The Speaker and Deputy Speaker should know how to chair meetings. It's what they do permanently, whereas the chairs of committees are members of Parliament who've got broad-ranging things. I will predict that Mr. Speaker will be pretty tired by the end of estimates proceedings. So let me come to this more detailed question of examining what we mean when we talk about estimates. At its highest level, estimates are the statement of how government thinks money will be earned and how it will be spent. Money in was what was called the ways and means, and the money out was called supply. We now talk about these in the language of revenue and expenditure. They're called estimates because we don't know exactly what the amount of money raised will be or what the amount of money spent will be. They are forward projections. They're informed calculations, given what we know about past budgets, what we anticipate in terms of changes in expenditure and revenue patterns, the election commitments of the government of the day. So looking forward, we have estimates. Looking backwards, as the complement of estimates, we have the audited reports of the accounts, which are framed around actual expenditure and actual revenue. And the synergy between estimates looking forward and audit looking backward lies not merely in the duality of accountability and the role of Parliament, because audit is a parliamentary function. The Auditor General is an officer of the Parliament and reports directly to the Parliament, but also in the administration of these programs and the revenues and expenditures. We can draw a thread between our budget, what we expect to raise and spend, and our reporting, what we know we spent and raised. And I'm going to come back to that as an important opportunity that estimates presents. Gearing down lower into the more practical functions of this, estimates are not merely those budgetary elements, they're also this practical accountability. The executive is accountable to the Parliament, and it is accountable through this estimates process, going right back to 1641 and that first committee of the House of Commons, through to where we find ourselves now in Queensland. It is also, estimates is also this series of annual portfolio committee meetings of the Legislative Assembly, where members of Parliament ask questions about the budget. And I'll come to who they ask questions of very shortly. Estimates is also an accumulation of information by public administrators, by public servants, with the aim of informing their ministers, the chief executives and other senior officials so that they can answer questions. And a lot of you, I suspect, are interested in this because you're engaged in this process of developing this large pile of estimates briefs. So it's this accumulation of information. And the last point I want to make here is that it's also a process. Estimates is a process. It's both an ongoing process from year to year, and each year it's the annual process of preparing the briefs, fronting up to the committees, answering questions on the spot or on notice. Questions on notice can be asked beforehand as well. And the reporting by the Parliament of the budget, and any mop-up that comes from that, any impact that that has on the administration that you as public servants and people engaged in this process will have to do. Estimates has challenges. Estimates takes a lot of time. Some people see it as a distraction from the real work of public officials, but it is actually part of the real work. It's an important part of the public service assisting ministers and chief executives to discharge their obligation to Parliament as the pinnacle of our body politic, of our democracy. Yes, it's not the job that you do every day. It's a job that comes around and occupies a day, a month, whatever, every year. But it is actually embedded in the real work of government being supported by skilled and dedicated public servants to discharge its responsibility to the Parliament. There's a lot of information. Rob might be able to share with you later on just how many briefs have to be handled through this process by the Premier as the leader of the government as a whole. But there wouldn't be an agency in government that hasn't prepared something in the order of 100 documents to assist the Minister or the Director General. Sometimes it may be many, many more than that in those gigantic portfolios like health, education and transport. So there's a lot of information, and the challenges include making sure that that information is accurate. If the information is wrong and your Minister or Director General uses that information to address the parliamentary committee, technically they've misled Parliament. And misleading Parliament is a very grave error indeed. So the accuracy of that information, which can be corrected, of course, if there's an inadvertent error, and it does happen, there are processes for correction. Is the information consistent? If you've got 200, 300, 400 briefs that overlap in some instances, are they using the same language? Are they using the same numbers? That internal consistency is a huge challenge. And another challenge for those of you who've assisted at estimates or appeared at estimates before, you will know, is how do you get that information in a timely way into the hands of the people who are going to answer the questions, to inform the Parliament? So accessing this vast amount of information in a timely way is a huge challenge. And it's one of the reasons, as a later slide will show, why a lot of work goes into preparing for estimates. Estimates can be stressful. People can feel anxious about appearing, if not before a parliamentary committee, at least maybe in the red chamber or maybe in the background, assisting someone who has this onerous responsibility of speaking truthfully to Parliament. And the onus lies on us, you as public servants, to make sure that the information is correct, it's accurate, it's internally consistent, it's delivered on time, and that can be a pretty stressful activity. The more you do it, the less stressful one feels. One of the reasons it's stressful is because this is an inherently political activity, and politics sometimes can be dirty and it can sometimes be personal. It is inherently political because it is a parliamentary activity, and Parliament is not only actually political, it is legitimately a political forum. It is made up of the elected members of the Legislative Assembly and the Governor as representative of the sovereign. Those elected representatives are politicians, and their job is inherently and foremost political. To be in government, to stay in government, to maintain the ascendancy over their opponents, the opposition to score points over the government to score points over the opposition. So you will find point scoring. You will find people trying to score points by way of vendetta, unfortunately. So it may be that some of the questions involve personalities, involve people in the public service. It feels uncomfortable. I know, I've been there. There's a lot of polemic, there's a lot of headline grabbing. They are legitimate things, but they're not your job. Now, there are opportunities that come up in estimates. One of the big ones is that ministers and chief executives have to focus on the detail. Now, lots of ministers and lots of chief executives are really good at detail, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. There is no escaping detail in the estimates process. So this creates an opportunity for policy leaders and financial leaders in agencies to engage directly with ministers and with chief executives on these questions. It's an opportunity to create concordance with the performance audit requirements that will pop up later on in our processes. The estimates become actuals down the track. How are we going to report on those actuals? The estimates can help us inform that, particularly on the performance audit mandate. Did we achieve the targets that were set out and were scrutinised in estimates? It's an opportunity also to uncover inconsistencies and sometimes deficits in our programs or in the way we speak about them, the way we articulate them. So in that scrutiny of the detail that ministers and directors general and other senior executives are going to be looking at, they might ask questions. Is that right? Is that really how we talk about this program? So there's a chance to refine some of that language as well. And along with that, the opportunity then to align or realign some of our policy priorities and thereby building some policy coherence. Also an opportunity to capture policy intent. A minister might say, well, I know that's what we're doing now, but that's not what we really want to be doing. We actually want to achieve something slightly different from that. So in the next turn of the wheel, there might be some revision, or even in this turn of the wheel. But this requires time and effort. And you've already got lots of time and effort being thrown into preparing the estimates briefs, getting across them, helping your ministers and Director General and other senior officials do the best job that they possibly can in assisting the Parliament to discharge its accountability responsibilities. That extra focus on engaging with those ministers, building that coherence, looking forward to the opportunities for better performance, better articulation, some reform of policy, that does take time and more effort. So it is, I've called it an opportunity, but it is potentially, of course, a bit of a challenge. So why are we preparing? Well, there is a huge volume of information. Most of what we're talking about at estimates are points involving count. How much money, how many people will be affected, how many benefits are there, what are our timeframes, what are we expecting people to be doing, the performance indicators, how often are we doing things, how have things changed between now and previous reporting cycles. So those items of count are actually very, very important. Being organised is vital. If you've got 100, 200, 300 briefs, you must know how to get into them so that you can pass that piece of paper, that piece of information on to the person who is addressing the parliamentary committee. One of The aims of people in support of estimates is rapid access and clear communication to the Minister and the Director General. I'm hoping that Rob might be able to give you a few practical tips shortly about how that communication can take place for those of you who've never done it before. Generally, the challenge that you must prepare for is about volume and timeliness, rather than the challenge those of you who are involved in policy domain, which is dealing with complication and complexity. It is adjunctive to it, but that speedy access through large volumes and getting the information up in a timely way is what matters in the estimates process. All those other opportunities, those lessons, come outside of the actual hearing itself. I just want to dig briefly into the formalities of what goes on at estimates. This has been pretty stable ever since the GOS reforms and the Estimates Committee A, B and C in 1990. There have been some important changes in the meantime, but generally the Parliamentary Committee, the Portfolio Committee in estimates is considering just one very simple question. And the chair will normally start with the question before the committee is that the proposed expenditure be agreed to. The sitting times of the committees are strict, and I'll put a slide up shortly, and Andrew will distribute to people these papers so you don't have to make notes. The sitting times are strict. They will start at a stated time and finish at or around a stated time. There's some flexibility in the chair. But if you look back at parliamentary estimates over the years, they tend not to run behind or ahead by more than a minute or two. So they tend to be pretty strict. In theory, the questions put to ministers and chief executives are really only about the current budget. But in reality, they range far and wide. The current budget is informed by previous budgets. So don't be surprised to find a government member asking a question of a minister which reflects on perceived deficits in past budgets. The now opposition, when they were in government, failed to provide properly in the budget for this item. We hear this on a day-to-day basis. It won't come as a surprise. They might look forward to a whole lot of other political challenges. It's up to the chair how far and how wide questions can range. And the chair's role is both procedural and it's political. So while the speaker sits in some ways above the hurly-burly of politics in the Legislative Assembly, the speaker is still a member of the Legislative Assembly and is a member of a political party. And will be mindful of the objectives of the government to score points over the opposition and of the opposition to score points over the government. The Speaker and the Chair, as Chair of all estimates committees, should bring greater consistency. But as I said, I suspect the Speaker will be pretty tired by the end of this process. And the staff who support the Speaker as Chair, who are parliamentary staff, are probably going to come back and say there must be better or different ways to do this next year. So keep an eye on the potential for future changes. Maybe the Deputy Speaker will step up a bit more, who knows. As I said, politics is real. It's an inherent part of the process. The main focus is indeed the facts of the budget. How much, how many, how often, by what time. But that political point scoring will be there. We see it play out if you read the news reports of the government making claims about what happened in the past, the opposition making claims about waste or whatever, inefficiency. Politics is for the politicians. Your job as public servants, mine when I was a public servant, was to stay out of politics. But nonetheless, our job is to arm our minister with everything that the minister needs And if the minister wants to make political points, that's the minister's call. We can't stop that from happening. But our legitimate role is in that domain of facts. Just a word of warning though, estimates, because estimates can be a bit repetitive and a bit tedious and a bit stressful, there is a tendency in politicians to gamify the estimates process. In the past, I've been aware of ministers who want to get particular words on the Hansard record, and it's part of a game, and people snicker when it happens. Don't be part of the game. Your job is a very, very serious job, and you need to be mindful of that. So this is the timetable. As I said, Andrew will circulate this, so don't need to take notes. But on a day-to-day basis, portfolios are scrutinised by the various committees. The 7 committees take their turns. You will see that in more detail when you get that. So we'll move on to the next slide, I think. Here's an example. The Health, Environment and Innovation Committee, which is chaired by Mr. Mulhook. Obviously, the Speaker will be presiding at estimates. They'll be looking at the health and ambulance services and environment, tourism, science and innovation portfolios. Because the Speaker is chairing, there are 7 LNP members. Of the 7 members, there are 4 LNP and 3 non-government members on that committee. Just by way of illustration, Dr. O'Shea, the member for South Brisbane, is a medical doctor, and she no doubt will have particular interests in the health and ambulance services portfolio. So people from that portfolio will no doubt be mindful of what her interests might be, and that might shape which briefs are requested by the Minister's office or which you offer up. Andrew? Now, there are formal obligations that sit on you as officials. Schedule 8, the Code of Practice to the Standing Orders, will be in the package that Andrew circulates, states the Code of Practice for public service employees assisting or appearing before portfolio committees. It's part of a package of 3 things that I think are really important. So the next slide shows the Cabinet Handbook obligations. In section 9.2.3, the Cabinet Handbook talks, that's the entirety of what the Cabinet Handbook says about what's happening at estimates. Ministers, Director Generals and certain Chief Executives must be present at all times in estimates. It's a requirement that Cabinet has laid down, that the Executive must take seriously its obligation to the Parliament. And lastly, in this list, the Code of Conduct on the next slide, and that's also in the package. It's also, all these documents are publicly available, so there's nothing special coming out of that. So 2025 is the first estimates for the Crisafulli government, which was elected in October last year. 9 ministers have estimates experience going back a decade. So for everyone, this is going to be a refresher or a novel experience. Of those 9, which is less than half the ministry, only 3 have overlap in their current portfolios. So you can expect ministers to be a little bit tentative in this first turn of the wheel, or to embrace this with gusto. As an aside, Minister Frecklington was an assistant minister in the Newman government. Attendance, the Speaker will be there as chair. The portfolio committee members will all be there, all 6 of them. Other MPs may attend with the leave of the committee under standing orders, and they do. And when they attend, they are there as members of Parliament and may and do ask questions. The attendance of ministers, DGs and certain chief executives is mandatory, and other staff from the portfolio will be present in the Red Chamber or in other places to assist the Minister and the Director General. By way of example, this might be a little bit hard to see, but the previous estimates, this is from the last government, there were the 6 committee members, there were 6 opposition members who attended, And for this one, the portfolio, the committee, Clean Energy, Jobs, Resources, Minister de Brenny turned up with his Chief of Staff and Senior Media Advisor. The Director General and one of the Deputy Director General were there. There were also CEOs of 2 portfolio committees. In the afternoon, a different cohort of people turned up, and that's in the next slide. So Minister Stewart turned up with the Chief of Staff. There was the Director General and 4 senior officials from that portfolio, plus 2 CEOs of portfolio agencies. Mr. Squire will have the joy of reappearing again this year, I'm sure. The portfolio committees must report on estimates under Standing Order 168. If they don't report, they are taken under the standing orders to have agreed to the expenditure. They will report. The report may include reservations or dissent, and this can be very political. It can be a forum for the opposition to attack a minister. Previous reports have said, oh, the minister was evasive, the minister failed to answer the question, or they can make score political points, as all the reports did last year, where the then opposition, now the government, made points about their dissatisfaction with the chairing of the estimates committees leading to the reform. Next one. So in summary, estimates is a lot of work. It involves a lot of detail. A lot of that detail is not used in the estimates process, so it's easy to think of it as wasted effort. But adopting a constructive approach means that you can make it useful. It's about accounting integrity. It's about preparing for future audits, about building policy coherence, about building policy opportunities, and about articulating across these 3 domains that are at play in estimates. The minister as the politician, a policy domain talking about the programs, and the administrative domains talking about both the finances and organising and preparing for estimates. And I just want to finish on this note. Estimates are important. The estimates process is important. And being part of estimates is being part of history, about building accountability, your part in making government work as it's meant to, about helping the executive to be accountable to the parliament, and about helping parliament play its role in building a good society. It's a privilege to be involved in estimates, a privilege that you ought to celebrate. It may not bring love, but you don't need to worry about it. So, Andrew, I hand back to you.
Well, Peter, I really want to thank you very much for that really interesting dive into the history and the reason for estimates and all of the different considerations around it. I'm not going to take up too much more time at this point because I'd like to move through to Rebecca and Rob. Hopefully you guys can hear me. We're working to try and fix whatever audio issue we were having there. So thank you again, Peter. Really fantastic information, and pleased to hand over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Andrew, and thank you very much, Peter. It's good to hear another perspective for the public servants at the moment that are living all things estimates. It's certainly good to hear from someone else about their experiences as well. I'm just going to provide a bit of a snapshot of estimates 2025 and I guess a practical perspective from Department of the Premier and Cabinet, which is where both Rob and I are working. I'll try not to repeat too much of what Peter said. There's a few things that might be a bit duplicative, but I'll try and do that very quickly. Obviously, for the public service, the estimates process is very busy and it's a very important time of the year, and we do take it very seriously. It sort of pretty much consumes us for a large part of this time of year. As you'd all be aware, and Peter sort of touched on this, the state budget was handed down in 2025 on the 24th of June this year by the Treasurer. The budget does comprise a suite of documents, and I think overall, if you look at that web page there's almost 50 separate documents that come together to form the budget. So there's the budget papers themselves, there's service delivery statements for every department, and there's also regional delivery plans. So it's quite a large volume of documents to form the budget. The budget itself doesn't actually appropriate the funds, and Peter mentioned this. It's the legislation itself that actually sets out the appropriation, and that's in the appropriation bills, and that's introduced into Parliament when the budget is handed down. And those bills, the appropriation bills, are what is referred to the Estimates Committee or to the committee process to be examined, which is what the process we're about to commence, is the examination of those bills, which sets out the estimated expenditure for the coming year, as well as estimated revenue and a number of other things that Peter touched on. So it's that examination of those bills that must occur. It's actually mandated in the Parliament of Queensland Act as well. So it's set out, in the Constitution of Queensland. So it's set out there that we have to go through these processes. So it is quite important. And it's not until obviously those bills are considered and through the estimates process that the committee report, as Peter mentioned, gets made to Parliament. The bill is debated. It's in the Parliament, and that's when it's passed, and that's when the funds flow. So it's quite a process. And when you think about a normal piece of legislation, it goes through a very similar process. The government must pass appropriation bills in order to operate in the financial year. So if the appropriation bill is not passed, then there's obviously a major problem for the government. So it's a very, very important process. The appropriation bill itself is a pretty simple bill when you look at it. It's only 20 pages long and only has 4 clauses, but the detail is in the schedules, and there's a number, I think there's 2 schedules in the appropriation bill, and that sets out appropriations for each department. And that's the figure, and they're quite large figures when you look at them, that get discussed in a bit more detail through the process and with the aid of the SDS and other documents. So each Minister and Director General then appears, as Peter said, before the Portfolio Committee to answer questions about their budget and their portfolio and what they're going to spend their money on, or what they're proposing to spend money on. Remember, this is public money, so this is a very important accountability mechanism. So it's important to understand how the government is spending taxpayers' money. So it's a very important process. The public services role, as Peter has mentioned, is to assist the Minister and the Director General or the CEO in preparing for the hearing. So we do this by preparing what we call estimates briefs, and we do it on any possible topics that we think might come up at the hearing. So we're very much guided by what's in our budget and our SDS and what we say the department's going to be doing and what the Minister's going to be doing. So that's our sort of rough guide, and Rob will talk a little bit more about this. So we then go and we write a brief, if you like, on the sort of topics. Of course, being very good public servants, we like to make sure we have briefs on anything that might come up, but it's also very important that we write these in a very succinct way, because we don't want to be writing pages and pages of things for ministers and DGs. I don't think at the end of the day that's that helpful for them. So we have a very succinct briefing process. The most important thing for me, and when I talk to my team and when we are providing our briefs, is that the information is accurate and up to date. I think Peter mentioned that you don't want to be in a situation where you're giving your minister or your DG information that is actually inaccurate, and they use that and they say the wrong thing in Parliament and mislead Parliament. So it's very important that we are very focused on what we're putting in those briefs and how accurate they might be. And my hope for my team and the briefs that we write in DPC is they've got everything they need and it is accurate. So that's the process that we go through, and it does take weeks, and Rob will talk a bit about that. Obviously, for the Department of the Premier and Cabinet, our experience is a little bit different from some agencies. So I'll just talk a little bit about that before I hand over to Rob. Traditionally, the first hearing in the estimates calendar is actually the Legislative Assembly, so the Speaker, and he will appear on Monday. And then the first government hearing, which occurs on the Tuesday, is the Premier and the DG of DPC. That's usually in the morning, and it is followed by Treasury in the afternoon. The Premier can sometimes be asked a broad range of questions given his role as the First Minister. So think about the sort of role the Premier has compared to other ministers. So there's that opportunity there. Questions should, however, relate to the proposed expenditure, the budget, and what's articulated in the SDS. And ultimately, what questions are asked and are allowed are is a matter for the committee chair, which Peter mentioned is the Speaker or the Deputy Speaker. So it's a matter for the committee to determine that. But we don't know what's going to be asked, and we don't know how that's going to play out. So that's why we take a very broad approach, and we try to make sure that we have all the briefs there that might be used, and they have all the information that's necessary. So that's what we really focus on. Obviously, after the committee hearing, and I think there's, for this year, I think Parliament has agreed to a total of 68 hours and 45 minutes for public hearings, and that's just for the government ministers. So obviously there's, with the Speaker, there's extra time there as well, but that's just for the government and the departments. So it's a lot of time and a lot of questions to go through. At the end of the committee process, and Peter did mention this, the estimates committees do report on the expenditure bills and the appropriation bills, and that report is provided to Parliament. That is considered as part of the debate on the bill, and before the bill is passed, it would be considered. So that's sort of a very important step when you think about it, the process. Obviously, it sets the scene for the coming financial year. So it does outline a whole range of things, and that process is a really important process to go through. And Peter did talk about the types of things that we can get questions about. So certainly for DPC, we sort of do think a lot about not just the financial accountability and the spending, but also about policy and how that relates into what we're spending our money on and what the Premier and the department is spending its money on. And that's how we ensure the Premier and the DG is accountable for that. So I'm going to hand over to Rob now. Rob is going to give a little bit more into the actual what we do in DPC and what we do as authors of the estimates briefs, etc. So I'll hand over to Rob now.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'll just remind you all, if you do have questions, you can find the Q&A function in the top bar of your screen. I know that a couple of you had your hands up. So I'm going to take you through the sort of actual process in DPC. I will have had roughly an 8-week flight path from start to finish. So from starting this particular function through to probably the 30th of July. The hearing is on the 29th for us, but I'll talk about why we go a little bit further. The first step for me is always the 3 T's, as I call it, which is the timeline, the template, and the topic list. So the timeline, working back from the hearing, what are the key steps, how long each part of the process is going to take, who's doing it, and then also factoring in your approvals for all of these estimates briefs that are happening. So this is my mini project plan, for want of a better phrase. The template is for the estimate brief itself. It's a good idea to have a consistent look and feel for the Minister and the Director General, so that they can get the information they need really simply without distraction. And we also adapt to the preferred style of the Premier as well. So typically this has a front page which has a recommended response, and then a back page or two that has some background detail about the issue at hand. And finally, we have a topic list. So what do we think that we need to provide briefs on? So this is based on our work as a portfolio agency. We have responsibilities ourselves, but it's also based on current work programs, major funding programs in the budget. It also takes account of government priorities and the government's statement of objectives for the community. And obviously we don't stop work whilst this is all going on. Things are happening in the real world as we speak. So we often find that things get added to our topic list as we go in response to certain events. We aim to pass our briefs through Office of the DG and Premier's Office at least twice, so that they have good sight of what's going on and they have the opportunity to really get to grips with the detail, as Peter hinted at before. And that first and second pass is also a good way for us to check whether we're covering the right issues in the right way. As time progresses, we're also looking to sharpen the tone of our briefs and prepare the folders. And it's quite common for the shape of the folders to change at this point. So we might start, for instance, with an alphabetical list of issues, but we might move, for instance, last year, youth justice issues were coming towards the front of the folder because we thought that they might be more important. We try to limit the number of briefs that will require an update on the day of the hearing or on the day before the hearing. Obviously, we're trying to give the Premier information that is as current as possible, but there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of risks involved with things changing on a daily basis. On the day of the hearing, we ask that our officers are listening in on the live stream through their desktops. And we also have access to one of the committee rooms at the bottom of the stairs leading up to the chamber, where we set up with some staff, a printer, and this is our way to get information into the chamber on the day of the hearing if we really, really need to. Our work doesn't end with the hearing itself. Typically, the committee will send a transcript of the hearing through for us to check. Obviously, we can't put words into ministers' mouths. We can only check the accuracy of the record against what was said in the live feed. Where incorrect information has been provided, because there's a lot happening in a very short space of time, 4 hours feels like a long time when you start, and then it's over in the blink of an eye. We have an opportunity to correct the record by advising the committee what should have been said, and the correct information. I'm really conscious that we're getting really close to the end, so I'll stop there and hand back to Andrew in case there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Rob and Rebecca. We really value you putting that contemporary context around the process and some of the detail there. We do have we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. We've probably got time for one. I don't know if Peter and speakers, you can see that there. It might be a good one for Rob or Rebecca, which is, with the new process, can we expect the Speaker/Deputy Speaker to ask questions of the Minister and witnesses, or is questioning left for the relevant committee members and other attendees?
You go, Rob. Sorry.
Yeah, well, in the past, the committee chair, regardless, has played the committee chair role. So they're really the umpire for what's going on. They do tend to have a question, but when they were a party member, it would be a Dixer. So we're still going to find out how the speaker is going to chair it, but my guess would be that he will be the umpire rather than a questioner.
Okay, thank you. And let's go with perhaps one other, which was the first question through. Who sets the hearings schedule?
Sorry.
Again, that's probably Rob.
The government of the day. So on the day of the budget hearing, of the budget, the leader of the House puts forward a motion that lists the hearing schedule for that year, and includes any amendments to the standing orders to govern the way that the estimates hearings will be covered. So this year we had the schedule, plus also the fact that the Speaker was going to be chairing all of the sessions.
Well, we are at 11:29, so we've done a stellar job of running in right on time today. I just wanted to take a moment to, on behalf of IPA Queensland and really everybody online, to sincerely thank Peter for his time and his expertise today and his reflections. And of course also Rebecca and Rob online too from Department of Premier and Cabinet for joining us and offering your knowledge and insights as well. We really appreciate everybody's time and what you've offered for the audience today. If you enjoyed the session, please sign up for IPA Queensland's monthly insights. That will allow you to keep up with everything else that's happening with IPA, and also, write-ups, key takeaways from our events, other commentaries and analysis on there, which Peter has contributed to in the past as well.
There will be a brief paper that I've provided to Andrew, as well as those other resource materials.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. That will be out shortly. And of course, we value everybody's feedback. You can see a QR code on your screen now. We'd love you to submit a very, very short feedback survey. If you could, we will also distribute that with the materials when they come out after the event. So thank you again, everybody. We're on 11:30, so we will close up there. Have a fantastic day.